Megan and Daniel Hayes looked like the perfect couple, smiling in every photo, hosting backyard barbecues, living the suburban dream. But behind those smiles hid a secret so dark that when Daniel turned up dead in his own home, the biggest twist wasn't who killed him, it was who didn't realize they had. Megan and Daniel Hayes looked like the perfect couple. From the outside, they had everything. A comfortable home in the quiet town of Bridgewood, good jobs, and a marriage that seemed solid. Neighbors often saw them tending to their garden together, laughing over cups of coffee on the porch, or walking their golden retriever in the evenings. They were the kind of couple people pointed to and said, "They've got it all figured out." But in reality, no one ever truly knows what goes on behind closed doors. It was a crisp autumn morning when everything changed. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the neighborhood in soft gold. Megan sat on her porch steps, wrapped in a sweater, staring into nothing. Her coffee steamed beside her, untouched. She seemed lost in thought, though no one passing by could have guessed what was running through her mind. Around 9 a.m., a frantic call came through to 911. The calm tone of the dispatcher was met with a trembling voice. Megan Hayes reported that she had returned home from a walk to find her husband lying motionless in his study. Within minutes, police cars filled the street, their flashing lights cutting through the quiet morning air. Curious neighbors gathered on lawns, whispering in disbelief. When officers entered the house, they were met with an eerie stillness. The living room was neat, untouched, and quiet, too quiet. Then they reached the study. Daniel was slumped over his desk, a deep wound to the side of his head. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no forced entry. It looked like he'd simply been sitting there when death came for him. Megan was sitting in the kitchen, pale and shaking. She told officers she had gone out for a morning walk, leaving Daniel asleep upstairs. When she returned, she found him like this. Her story was steady, almost too steady. She cried at the right moments, gasped at the right questions, but something about her calm composure didn't sit right with detectives. Her hands trembled, yet her voice didn't. The medical examiner quickly ruled out suicide. The angle of the wound suggested someone else had delivered the fatal blow. The murder weapon wasn't immediately found, and that only deepened the mystery. The back door was locked. All windows were sealed from the inside. No footprints led in or out. The only fingerprints found throughout the home were Daniel's and Megan's. Bridgewood wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. It was a small, safe town where people left their doors unlocked and waved to each other from driveways. So when word spread that Daniel Hayes, the kind, quiet teacher from the local high school, had been murdered, shock rippled through the community. People whispered in grocery store aisles and leaned closer over fences, trading theories about what might have happened. Police started questioning neighbors. No one had seen anyone enter or leave the house. One woman mentioned hearing a strange noise around midnight, like a door closing, but she didn't think much of it. Another neighbor said Megan's behavior that morning seemed odd. She just sat there, they said, like she was waiting for something. As investigators pieced together the timeline, something strange began to stand out. Megan's morning walk should have taken about 25 minutes based on the route she described, but surveillance footage from a nearby street camera showed her walking past just 10 minutes before she claimed to have returned home. That left a full half hour unaccounted for. Still, Megan played the role of a devastated wife perfectly. She thanked the officers, provided every answer they asked for, and cooperated without hesitation. Yet, in her eyes, there was something distant, detached, as though she were watching everything happen to someone else. The lead detective noted this in his report. "Mrs. Hayes appears composed," he wrote. "Not numb, controlled, possibly rehearsed." Meanwhile, the community rallied around her. Friends brought food, flowers, and sympathy. At Daniel's memorial, Megan stood at the front, accepting condolences with quiet grace. She cried softly during the service, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but never breaking down completely. It was the kind of grief that seemed measured. You have to ask yourself, could you keep that calm if your spouse was murdered? Could you talk to police, answer their questions, and walk through the scene without falling apart? Tell me what you think in the comments. Is Megan just strong, or is she hiding something? If you're watching this and you're already hooked by how strange this case feels, hit the like button. Because, as you'll see, this is only the beginning. The detectives didn't have enough to accuse anyone yet, but the case file was filling up fast with inconsistencies. Every small clue pointed in the same direction, though no one dared to say it aloud just yet. The person closest to the victim, the one who claimed to have found him, was starting to look less like a witness and more like the center of the storm. Bridgewood's perfect couple had fallen apart, and somewhere between those quiet porch mornings and that terrible day, love had turned into something else entirely, something deadly. The days following Daniel Hayes' death were heavy with suspicion. The police tried to treat Megan gently at first, but behind closed doors, they were already asking difficult questions. When someone dies in their own locked home, the first theory is always the simplest. Someone inside the home did it. And in this case, that person was Megan. Detectives began digging into the couple's life, hoping to find a motive. On the surface, their marriage seemed ideal. They had been together for over 15 years, had no children, and spent most weekends at home or with friends. But a few close acquaintances started to paint a different picture. They described Daniel as kind and patient, but often withdrawn in recent months. He had been staying late at school, claiming paperwork kept piling up. Others noticed he seemed tired, distracted, as if something was weighing on him. When investigators looked into Daniel's phone and computer, they uncovered a string of emails between him and a colleague named Clara, messages that were far from professional. The two had been seeing each other for several months. Clara confirmed it during questioning, explaining that Daniel wanted to end his marriage but didn't know how. He had told her that Megan could be unpredictable when angry, and that he wanted to handle things carefully. Those words caught the detective's attention. Immediately, the narrative of a perfect marriage started to crumble. Megan and Daniel had argued often, though rarely in public. According to their next-door neighbor, shouting matches had become more frequent over the last few weeks. Megan's voice had been the loudest. "I heard her once say something like, 'You're not leaving me,'" the neighbor recalled. When detectives sat down with Megan again, their tone changed. The first interview had been calm, sympathetic. This time, it was more deliberate. The questions were sharper, meant to test her reactions. They asked about her relationship with Daniel, her morning routine, her walk, and whether she knew about his affair. Megan denied everything, claiming her husband was loyal and that they'd been happy. But her face twitched slightly when the detective mentioned Clara's name. She insisted she had nothing to hide, and her cooperation seemed genuine. Still, the small inconsistencies in her statements were impossible to ignore. She described leaving the house around 8 a.m., walking a route that should have taken 30 minutes. and returning home at 9:15, but police confirmed through traffic and street camera footage that she was back in her neighborhood much sooner. They also found that her smartwatch, which recorded her steps, showed far fewer than what her walk should have required. When confronted with that detail, she brushed it off, saying she'd paused to sit on a bench and think. But the problem was, there wasn't any bench along the route she'd claimed to have taken. The lie was small, almost meaningless on its own. But detectives knew small lies often hide big truths. Meanwhile, forensic teams were analyzing the crime scene again and again. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen valuables, no strange DNA samples. It was as though the killer knew exactly where to go, what to do, and how to leave without leaving a trace. That kind of precision doesn't usually come from strangers. The detective leading the case started to focus on Megan's behavior. She didn't ask about updates on Daniel's killer as often as grieving spouses usually did. She didn't demand justice or show anger. Instead, she spent most of her time talking about how everyone seemed to be looking at her differently. Her focus was on herself, not her husband's death. That stood out. You have to wonder, if you were innocent, wouldn't you be desperate to help find the person who took your partner's life? Wouldn't you be calling the police every day for answers? Tell me in the comments what you'd do if you were in her place. As the days passed, detectives continued to play their part carefully. They didn't want to scare her off or make her shut down. They invited her back to the station for what they called a follow-up conversation. She agreed, even thanked them for their hard work. To her, it must have felt like she was helping them piece together a tragic mystery. But to them, she was already the puzzle's missing piece. Behind the scenes, investigators were building a quiet but solid case. They had Daniel's phone records, Megan's inconsistent timeline, and the forensic evidence pointing toward an inside job. Still, they didn't have the weapon. Without it, the case was only half complete. That's when they decided to look deeper into Megan's movements after the murder. They examined security footage from nearby streets, stores, and gas stations. On one camera, less than an hour after the 911 call, Megan's car was seen parked at the edge of a wooded area behind their neighborhood. She had told police she'd gone for a drive to clear her head. Now that drive looked suspicious. Every discovery brought more questions, and every question seemed to circle back to the same person. Megan Hayes, the loving wife, the calm widow, the woman who claimed she just wanted answers, was starting to look like the only one who had them. And yet, there was something chillingly calm about her. Even as cracks appeared in her story, she smiled through interviews and thanked detectives for their time, almost as if she believed she was smarter than everyone in the room. But what Megan didn't realize was that the real game had just begun. The police were no longer searching for an unknown killer. They were setting the stage for an interrogation that would reveal not only what happened that morning, but what had been building inside her for years. When Megan Hayes arrived at the police station for her second interview, she carried herself with quiet confidence. She wore a simple black dress, her hair neatly tied back, and she greeted the detectives with a polite smile. To anyone watching, she looked like a grieving wife doing her best to cooperate. But inside that small room with beige walls and a single camera watching from the corner, everything was about to change. This was no longer a friendly conversation. Detectives had gathered enough inconsistencies to turn up the pressure. They had gone through Daniel's phone, his emails, and his private notes. The picture of their marriage that emerged was not one of love and understanding, but of control, jealousy, and resentment. Daniel had been planning to leave Megan for months. He had confided in a few trusted friends, telling them he felt trapped, not because of finances or fear of judgment, but because he believed Megan would never let him go peacefully. That morning, the lead detective placed a folder on the table between them. Inside were photos, reports, and screenshots. He opened it slowly, letting the silence fill the air. Megan sat still, her fingers folded neatly on her lap, her eyes shifting between the detective's face and the documents. When he mentioned Daniel's phone records, her posture stiffened slightly. The detective began reading out some of Daniel's text messages to Clara, the woman he had been seeing. In them, Daniel had written that he couldn't pretend anymore, that the marriage was over, and that he would be telling Megan that very night. The detective then said those words out loud, clearly and slowly. "We'll talk tonight. It's over." That was Daniel's last message before he died. Megan's eyes darted toward the table for a moment, then back up. Her lips parted as if she might say something, but she stayed silent. For the first time, her calm exterior faltered. The detective didn't accuse her directly, not yet. Instead, he spoke in a tone that was careful, almost gentle, asking if she had known about Daniel's plan to leave. She shook her head. He asked if they'd argued that morning. Another shake, then he leaned back in his chair and simply watched her. The silence grew heavier by the second. Silence in interrogation rooms is often louder than any question. People rush to fill it. Megan didn't. She just stared at her hands, blinking slowly. What's strange is how the mind works under pressure. People who lie often try to over-explain, to create new details to sound believable. Megan didn't. Instead, she began shrinking into herself, speaking softer, giving shorter answers. It was as if she realized that every word she said might turn into a weapon against her. Detectives already knew something she didn't. Forensic testing on her clothes had revealed faint blood spatter on the sleeve of her sweater, too small to notice at first glance, but clear under ultraviolet light. She had claimed she found Daniel already dead when she got home, yet the blood pattern suggested she was near him at the time of the attack. That fact alone shifted everything. When they brought it up, Megan froze. She didn't argue, didn't ask how that could be possible. She just stared blankly, as though her mind had disconnected from reality for a moment. The detective noted her reaction carefully. Imagine being in that room, knowing the walls are closing in, every piece of evidence pointing at you. Would you break down? Would you confess? Or would you hold onto your story, hoping it could still save you? Tell me in the comments what you think she should have done. At this stage, the detectives decided to stop treating her as a cooperative witness. They changed their language, referring to Daniel's death as a homicide instead of an incident. They spoke about the person responsible instead of the intruder. Each phrase was deliberate, meant to shift the atmosphere. Megan's breathing grew shallower. Her responses became clipped, emotionless. The once grieving widow now looked like a cornered animal, still and tense, waiting for a way out that wasn't coming. Then came the detail that cracked her silence. Detectives revealed that the house had been locked from the inside, and all entry points were sealed. They asked again how she'd gotten back in. Megan insisted she must have forgotten to lock the back door when she left. But crime scene photos showed otherwise. Every lock was secured. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she let out a short, uneasy laugh, like someone realizing they'd just been caught in a trap they didn't see coming. It wasn't the reaction anyone expected from a grieving wife. The detective leaned forward, placing a photograph of Daniel's study on the table. It showed the blood-stained chair, the shattered picture frame, and the faint mark on the desk where the murder weapon had rested before being removed. This, he said quietly, wasn't random. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Her jaw tightened and her fingers gripped the edge of the table. The silence stretched again, longer this time. That's when the realization finally began to sink in. She wasn't being asked questions anymore. She was being studied, evaluated, judged, and at that exact moment, Megan Hayes understood something that made her pulse quicken and her stomach twist. She was no longer helping the police solve her husband's murder. She was the murder suspect. If you're still with us and you've been following how this story is unraveling, make sure to subscribe, because the next part is where everything falls apart. The truth that comes out will make you question everything you thought you knew about guilt, memory, and denial. The interrogation room had grown smaller with each passing hour. The air was heavy, the lights dim but focused just enough to make Megan Hayes look exposed. The detective sat across from her, calm and patient, letting time work in his favor. Interrogations like this aren't about shouting or threats. They're about silence, evidence, and the slow erosion of confidence. Megan still tried to look composed, but anyone watching closely could see it. The faint tremor in her hands, the way she pressed her lips together to stop them from shaking, the quick glances at the clock as if time might rescue her. The detective began to lay out the pieces of the puzzle one by one. He spoke softly, methodically, repeating certain details to make sure they stuck. The blood spatter on her sleeve, the missing fireplace poker, the timeline that didn't make sense. Each detail chipped away at her story, leaving less and less room for coincidence. The poker, once part of the decorative set by their living room fireplace, had been missing since the morning of Daniel's death. Detectives had searched the property multiple times before finding it buried under loose soil behind the shed. It was wrapped in a towel and smeared with dried blood. Daniel's blood. Megan's fingerprints. When shown the photo of the weapon, Megan blinked twice, then looked away. Her voice was barely audible when she said, "That's not possible." But she didn't sound angry, she sounded lost. The detective didn't respond. He just slid the picture closer to her, then opened a folder showing the forensic match between the wound on Daniel's skull and the poker's edge. It was a perfect alignment. This was the moment she began to unravel. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Her breathing changed, her shoulders slumped, and her gaze shifted from the detective to the floor. She wasn't crying. She wasn't denying anything. She was remembering when people commit violent acts in moments of rage, they often rewrite their own memories. It's a defense mechanism, the mind's way of shielding itself from something too monstrous to face. Detectives watching from behind the glass could see the realization creeping over her, inch by inch. It wasn't the face of someone trying to hide the truth. It was the face of someone realizing it had been hiding inside her all along. The detective leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "You loved him, didn't you?" he said. She nodded slowly. "And he was leaving you." Her head lowered. "You didn't want to lose him." She didn't answer, but the silence was enough. Her fingers pressed into her palms, her nails digging into her skin. He asked her to describe what happened the night before the murder. She said they'd eaten dinner together, watched television, and gone to bed early. But then he asked her about the noise the neighbor heard, that single door closing around midnight. Her body stiffened. She swallowed hard. Then, for the first time, she whispered something that wasn't part of her original statement. We argued. That one admission shifted the entire interrogation. From that point forward, every question went deeper. How long did the argument last? What was it about? Did he threaten to leave? Did she grab anything in anger? Each question landed heavier than the last. Megan's answers were fragmented, slipping between denial and confession. She said she didn't remember much. She said she blacked out. She said it felt like a dream. Eventually, the detective asked her to close her eyes and tell him what she saw when she woke up. Her lips trembled as she spoke. She said she remembered Daniel slumped forward, blood spreading across his shirt. She said she panicked, wiped her hands, and locked the doors because she didn't want anyone to come in. She buried the poker that morning before calling the police. Every word came out flat, mechanical, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. From the observation room, another officer wrote in his notes, "She's remembering in fragments. She's not denying anymore. She's realizing." Megan opened her eyes again, but she didn't look at the detective. She looked at the table, at the photograph of Daniel's body, and whispered, "I didn't mean to." Those 4 words hung in the air. No one spoke after that. The detective leaned back and let the silence do its work. Confessions aren't always loud or tearful. Sometimes they come out as a whisper, as a moment of surrender when someone realizes there's nowhere left to run. Later that night, Megan Hayes was officially arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Her fingerprints, her blood traces, her confession, it was all there. When the case went to trial, her defense argued that it had been a moment of uncontrollable rage, not premeditation. But the prosecution painted a different picture of jealousy, control, and a woman who refused to lose what she thought was hers. The jury didn't take long to decide. Megan Hayes was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. She sat quietly as the verdict was read, her face blank, her hands folded neatly on her lap, the same calm she'd shown from the beginning, now drained of all meaning in the years that followed. The story of Megan and Daniel Hayes became one of Bridgewood's darkest legends. People still drive past that old house and wonder how love could twist into something so deadly. And maybe that's what makes this case so haunting. It didn't start with hate. It started with love that turned into fear, fear that turned into anger, and anger that ended in blood. As the screen fades to black, remember this: sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask or creep through the night. Sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table, smiling, pretending everything is fine right until the moment it isn't. If you made it to the end, tell us in the comments. Do you think this was a crime of passion or something much colder? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us just how thin the line between love and destruction can be.